Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen Beales. I'm the CEO of UK General. Thank you very much for coming along to the MGAA lunchtime briefing. We hope today to give you a little bit of insight into cyber, a little bit of information around cybercrime, a little bit of information around cyber generally, and then also around a personal lines product. So the key objectives for today is hopefully by the end of today we'll be able to give you some advice around the market conditions, new legislation that we believe will drive a greater demand for cyber insurance than is currently in the market. Understand about commercial products, because obviously cyber insurance from a commercial perspective has been sold for several years. That's a maturing market, but obviously the personal lines market in this area is very, very new. Use these learnings to obviously move forward into personal lines to see what the liability is as an individual consumer, and I would ask you today to perhaps think about yourselves as individual consumers rather than necessarily MGAs or brokers as you perhaps are in your professional capacity. And then finally, just around the government initiatives and opportunities perhaps for you to do your own research and to understand the risks both for yourselves and also for your consumers. So today here we have three entities, so myself from UK General, we have the two gentlemen in the middle from Munich Re, who we're working with to develop the personal lines products, and at the end we have Dan, who works for Pennington Solicitors. So first of all, I'll introduce Dan, and I will hand over to him to talk to you about the cybercrime and the legals of legal side of cyber insurance. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm here today to build a context or set the scene, as it were. I'm going to go through, as you see, a brief history of cybercrime, give you an idea of the sorts of statistics to give you a feel of the risk involved, and then we'll look at the new regulatory landscape that's on its way. That's a bit about my firm. I'm a partner at Pennington Manches. We're a reasonably sized firm. In terms of my own work, I have a specialist practice in cybercrime. I also write about cybersecurity law and cybercrime, and I've authored what I think is the first book covering cybercrime and security in the UK. A brief history of cybercrime. I think I should say at the outset, when you look at this, what's striking is that the example, so it starts, you see, in 1939 with Alan Turing and his what might loosely be called the first computer, the bomb. Thereafter, the incidents you see tend to be those involving the United States. The reason for that is when you actually look at the history of cybercrime in the UK, it didn't seem to exist as a criminal offence at all before the advent of the Computer Misuse Act in 1990. In fact, by way of example, it isn't on there, but in 1984, late 1984, early 1985, two chaps, Robert Schifrin and Stephen Gold, actually managed to they hacked into BT's Prestel system, and the way they did it was they saw over the shoulder of a BT engineer. The password was 1234. So there's probably a lesson to be learned. So they got into BT's system, were able to explore, in fact even it enabled access to the voicemail boxes of the royal family. And the result of that was BT said, look, these guys have got to be prosecuted. There wasn't actually any legislation on the books that enabled that, and what happened was the prosecution tried to squeeze a prosecution into forgery and counterfeiting. Remarkably, they succeeded at Southwark Crown Court because I think a jury just thought this must be the sort of behaviour we should punish, but the outcome was that on appeal, and eventually the House of Lords, who were quite scathing, it was held that no, this wasn't a criminal offence. And if it was going to be a criminal offence, it was a matter for Parliament to outlaw it, because it wasn't for the courts to try and invent an offence that didn't exist as at that time. So that then led to the 1990 Computer Misuse Act, which has subsequently been added to by the Serious Crime Act and other legislation. But as I say, that was really the start of computer crime or cybercrime as we know it today. And just taking you through the list, you'll see that it ends with the biggest attack on the NHS. There's clearly been many more attacks prior to that as well. I think it's like 1 in 5 UK businesses has been subject to an attack. And those are the ones that we actually know about. in my work, part of my work leads me to understand that most companies actually want to keep the lid on this. The last thing they want is the reputational damage that can flow from publicity of somebody accessing their system. So it's a deep-set problem. Statistically, you'll see there, so we're looking at fraud and cyber offences make up 40, so almost half of all crime. 11.8 million incidents of crime were covered, of which you'll see it's 5.6 million, the total there, were either fraud or computer misuse offences. Most common was bank and credit account fraud. I can tell you why I don't use online banking because of the number of cases I have where that's been the weak point of the banking system. 80% of online crime goes unreported, according to City of London Police, and online banking fraud, you'll see, increased by 64% in 2015. One other statistic that isn't up there as well is the high proportion of, if you like, insider cybercrime. So a high proportion of attacks, not just on businesses but also on individuals, are by those they know. So whether it's an employee on the inside, a partner, a spouse, basically somebody trying to get some sort of advantage, whether it's a commercial advantage, competitive, or in the lead up to a divorce, or just for vengeance. And finally, this takes us through to the regulatory landscape. I've included this because this is just an absolute game changer. And if you ever needed any evidence of how important cybercrime has become, if you look at the General Data Protection, which is Liz referred to as GDPR, personal information is now, if you like, the new gold. This legislation puts an individual's data at the very heart of the legislation, and it's that data that the focus is on. That's important from two angles. From the point of view of the business, it's going to mean that there's a ratcheting up of obligations, of considerations, and you'll see actually massive fines if there's a breach. There are two levels of fine. One is the greater of 4% of global turnover, or 20 million euros. The lesser fine is going to be the greater of 2% of total global turnover, or 10 million euros. And when you look at the examples of the sorts of things that those fines will be imposed for, it's not unimaginable. It's usually, for example, not being able to demonstrate you got consent for somebody's personal information, not being able to show that they knew how you'd use it. It's also massively important for the individual because it's going to mean that from 25th of May 2018, when this comes in, the other obligation on companies is when they've suffered some sort of breach or attack, they'll be obliged to report. All of a sudden, they're going to be highly visible. A lot of the clients I deal with now, which their problem never sees the light of day, that's not going to be the case anymore. It's going to be the case that it'll be flagged up, and if you're the consumer, you'll suddenly be aware of, not only that company B has been subject to a cyber attack, but it may also be that your own personal information has been appropriated as well. So I think that probably leads me to the next speaker, who is Thomas, and Thomas is actually going to explain how we got to the position that we're in today.
Thanks, Dan. So how did we get here? What are the developments we've already seen, and what are the developments that might be coming? Before we talk about the details of the developments in cyber, just a quick word on Munich Re. I guess most of you have heard of Munich Re. You might not know that Munich Re started to get involved in cyber insurance already more than 16 years ago. So in 2016, we wrote about 260 million euros in premium on a global basis. Most of that coming, as you can imagine, still from the US. And that then also includes our colleagues from HSB, and I believe some are here today, and they are also very active in the US and here in the UK in the cyberspace. So we have built a pool of experts in Munich Re to deal with cyber and the exposures, so we can offer assistance in policy wordings, underwriting, pricing, and so on. And of course, we sell reinsurance protection. Connected in the cyber world, let's have a brief look at the digital transformation. We might also call it revolution. Some of you are old enough to remember the times before we had email, when we still were using fax machines. Now I cannot remember when I sent the last fax, and I'm going to share a little story with you. It goes back a few years, so my youngest son, who's now 18, asked me, "Dad, were you already around when the internet was invented?" So I look at him and say, oh yeah, I was around before the internet was invented. I even grew up without the internet. He looks at me and goes, wow, that's how old you are. I mean, this is not too long ago. So the cyber world is reality and is here to stay, definitely. We have seen tremendous activity, tremendous changes, good intentions to exploit the potential, bad intentions to exploit the vulnerabilities, and we're going to look at both of them today. The Internet of Everything, the IoT, you hear it all over the place. So the number of online devices, as you can imagine, be it handheld or not, has increased exponentially. Devices nowadays connecting all aspects of consumer life. So the vision of the IoT, at least the vision, and it might sound scary, is that people will consume less energy because of smart thermostats and light bulbs. People will be better connected and more informed thanks to smart watches. People might be in better shape thanks to fitness devices, I'm not sure. They will be safer courtesy of smart security cameras and tracking wearables. They will never run out of milk because of connected fridges. And dinners will always turn out perfectly as they can watch their roasting whilst speed walking. At least that's the vision. And it's scary, certainly for some of you, but the younger generation, I would guess, sees it as less scary. Because these devices are already on the market, and some of them have been there for quite a while. The uptake is still moderate, but turning to a subject like online banking, there's a different story there, because online banking is already part of our daily life. Let's look at some statistics published by the ONS. 75% of people are willing to give away their banking details online. When you look at the age bracket of 25 to 34, 85% of those people do internet banking. So people give away very valuable information, be it via an app, be it via the internet, all the banking details, and for the young generation, they don't even think about it anymore. So there was a Deloitte report that came out in the UK, looking at the top 10 activities comparing the use of an internet browser to a mobile app. So for the mobile app, the number 6 activity is already internet online banking with 40%. For the browser, for the internet browser, people only use it for 18% for internet banking. So the online banking has already moved to the app world. Got a question for you. What do you think? What's the number 1 activity using an app according to this report? Just give me some ideas. Just some rough guess. The weather forecast, the good old weather forecast, that's what people use apps most for, 60%. But the younger generation, as I said, is really, is into the online world, is into the app world, and willing to give away a lot of information, valuable information. Talking about generations, the share of Generation Y, and that is people born between 1998 and 1999, has increased globally from 26 to 33% within 9 years. Looking at the UK, 82% of adults use the internet every day. 82%. 10 years ago, it was only 35%. When you look at the smartphone use, it is only 9 years ago that the first smartphone came out with a touch screen. And I would assume that almost everybody in this room today carries a smartphone with a touch screen. So that's a market penetration, at least for this room, I would guess, of 100% within 9 years. Not bad. The use of smartphones has changed too. In 2012, 96% of people used smartphones to make standard voice calls. That number is down to 69% now. So for a lot of people, the smartphone has become a computer that they don't use for making phone calls anymore. Question for you, another question. Who of you checks his or her smartphone at night? Can you please put up your hand? Oh, quite a few, quite a few. According to this Deloitte report, looking at the age bracket 18 to 24, 50%, 50 of that age bracket check their smartphone at night. And I can tell you my wife does it too. And for those of you who think, no, whoa, young wife, no. She's well outside that age bracket. But I love her dearly. I have to say that because this is a session is recorded, so I have to be careful here. And another number that I found interesting to see how it changes life. There was a question asked in that report, how the use of smartphones can cause disagreement with the partner. So from the 25 to 34-year-olds, 38% say yes, it causes disagreement with the partner, the regular use of smartphones. For the 45 to 55-year-olds, it's only 21%. And I'm just wondering whether this is a function of many years of marriage, when people start to enjoy that moment of silence after many years of marriage. But anyways, the message is the internet, the online world is here, and when you look at the statistics and now think about those 18 to 24-year-olds, the 25 to 34-year-olds are already like 80-90% online. When they grow older, the penetration of online services, of using the apps, is going to increase even more. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Tim to talk about a bit of the dark side of that extensive use.
Thank you. I'm going to carry on with the light for a little second because there's a quote on TechCrunch from Tom Goodwin that highlights how the digital revolution has revolutionized business, and you've ended up with companies like Uber using technology to be the biggest taxi company in the world, owning no taxis. You have other examples of Airbnb owning no hotels but being the biggest accommodation provider, and that's all because they've used the power of the internet to multiply their reach. But unfortunately, the same thing is being done in the world of crime, and you can see in this graph, as our policing services have got better and better at combating traditional crime in the physical world that requires physical access and the perpetrator to be in front of you and catchable, cybercrime has now taken off with a similar kind of growth that we're seeing in these digital businesses like Uber and Airbnb. So it's got to the point where the criminals are realizing they can commercialize their crime even further, and you have people on the internet selling their ransomware as a service, and you buy this for $40 and you can use it to extort people, and all that they ask is they get a small 5%, 10% cut of the money that you make. So it's very entrepreneurial of the criminals, and they have rating systems, so if you buy something that's very good, you can leave them a good feedback, and the whole thing snowballs from there. So it's quite a worrying situation that crime is growing at the rate of all these companies that we are idolizing. So I'm going to step back to the question of crime. Traditionally, crime, so you take burglary, you need one person to take the time and the opportunity to get into one house, steal physical things, take those physical things away, and sell them on in person to make a profit. And similar things go for things like blackmail. If you're going to blackmail someone, you need to find illicit information about that one person, contact them in a traceable way, demand money, and take payment in a traceable way. And it's quite a time-consuming process, and you're quite exposed at all points of that process. But if we flick into the good old world of cyberspace, you can buy this app that encrypts someone's computer. They've not done anything wrong. They might not have the security standards they should, but they haven't done anything nefarious that you're extorting them for. All they've got now is a computer they can't use that they want back. And you can then take anonymous payment of not a massive amount of money, but through Bitcoin, which if you get enough people, because you can now send this out to hundreds of thousands of people in one evening rather than you walking down one street and seeing 10 houses, you can get quite a scale to your criminal operation. And you take this money through Bitcoin and you're suddenly not traceable. So you live to extort another day rather than getting caught blackmailing people. And there's quite a lot of examples where this barrier and the ability to spread something in a mass way has benefited criminals. So you look at phishing or fake sellers online, you can make a very convincing website with not a lot of know-how and take people's bank details. You no longer need physical access to their wallet, you don't need to know their PIN number, you just need to have someone with good enough graphic design skills and buy a list of email addresses to send this out to. And you might send it to 100,000 people, you might send it to 1 million people, and you might only get a hit rate of 1%, but that 1% is still a lot of people, and it's devastating to those people that you take the money from. So the idea here is that crime has now moved away from something that's in the dark alley, and it's now something that's reaching into your homes, and people are exposed to that they don't know how to protect themselves necessarily, or their children. Because the more worrying thing is, if your child is being bullied, it used to be you could make the home a very safe place for them. But now, as Thomas said, if they're checking their phone in the middle of the night, and through social media the bullies are still able to get at them, that is made a traditional crime, if you want to call bullying a crime, even worse in the way they can access the children. So before we move on to what we have been doing in the personal line space, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about cyber insurance as it is as a commercial product, because this is the current product in the market, and this is where a lot of people will look to come down from to develop a personal lines product. And it's become established over the last 5 years with hundreds of people now offering this cover. And it's quite needed in the argument that your clients they can buy a property insurance, they can buy employer's liability, they can protect the buildings and the people, but there's nothing there for that data. And that data has been described as gold by Dan, the economist described it as the new oil. People with data are the people making the real money at the moment. But you can't buy insurance for that until you've got this cyber product. And then you're very hard pressed, even if you don't think you're a data company, you have a website, you take credit card, you have a customer list. At the least, you have an email system. So you would be very hard pressed finding a client that doesn't have some kind of cyber exposure. And the real difficulty at the moment is there is no standard language or coverage, and you may have two policies with broadly the same headings, but when you dig into the coverage, they are covering materially different things. So it is an exercise for every broker to look into what the policies they are actually selling. And the largest part that we feel that they're not selling on is the emergency response. The fact that you have a 24/7 hotline, and if you call this hotline, it may be your first ransomware, it may be your first data breach, but you know the guys on the other side of that phone are IT experts, are legal experts, and it's definitely not their first ransomware or their first data breach. And they will hold your hand the whole way through that process. And this is one of the points of the commercial product that we think is very key to bring down into the personal space, where people have even less time and knowledge about their IT security. It's no longer you have an IT department dealing with your security, you're just doing the best you can as a person that's been dumped into this cyber world. And I guess the other side people like to see is the growth potential. So this is a graph of the US cyber premium, which is the biggest cyber market, about 85% of the world. And you can see it was bumbling along with not a lot of premium. And it's about the level Allianz came out recently and said Europe has 20 million euros of premium today, which is about 2011 in the US. And then you see in 2012, more of the regulations started to bite. There were more data breaches, and it skyrocketed. And you would expect in the commercial space the same thing to happen after GDPR coming in. And as that happens, the awareness, as Dan said, with everyone else of their cyber risk is going to go up, and companies are going to start trying to shift their cyber risk to other people. And no presentation is complete without some kind of concrete talk about if we're paying premium for something, there should be losses that are being paid for. So you have the very famous breaches in America with big data losses from Target and Anthem that cost them millions and millions of pounds, but it's not something you can really relate to a personal situation. You have BA and Southwest Airlines that have had massive chaos at their airports because their computer systems have been down. Again, in a personal line space, you're probably not talking necessarily about fixing a computer when it breaks, though you possibly could look at that as a product. What becomes more interesting is you look at the small SMEs being hit by ransomware. The hotel in Austria got hit 5 times, and they were locking people out of their rooms because they couldn't cut keys. And then you have WannaCry that hit over 200,000 computers, and there's another one now called Fireball that they think is over 200 million computers, where this is just an indiscriminate mass attack which affects SMEs, but it is equally going to affect your private lines customers. So that is the space where the commercial possibly is now coming down and doing things that would impact private lines customers. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Karen, who is going to talk more about our private lines work.
Thanks, Tim. So Thinking about, as we've heard from the three gentlemen, thinking about personal lines, thinking about how it might impact on us as consumers rather than insurance professionals. We've got some real life examples, and I have to say, I didn't know Dan until fairly recently, but now hearing that he does send faxes, which Thomas said he never happens, and Dan actually sends faxes to his bank because he doesn't do online banking. Now I'm starting to think, oh my goodness, we were just talking beforehand about whether we do mobile banking, using apps and so on. I personally don't, but I do online banking, and now Dan's frightened me, so I think I might change that when I get home. But yeah, so it's just really interesting, and I think as individuals we all assume that the bank or the credit card company will reimburse us for any losses, and I think you'll have, there are some interesting facts, examples and figures and so on in here, which I think does demonstrate a need, exactly as Tim said, that whilst we collectively are selling lots of commercial cyber type products, that there potentially is a market for personal lines, and just to start thinking about that. And equally at the end of the session, I would really appreciate any feedback from you because at the moment we're developing this product, it's not quite ready for launch. But from our perspective, it's how we then launch that product. Is it standalone? Do you think it would sell as an add-on to something else? We've been doing a lot of research in this area, and we have some views already. But it'd be quite interesting to get some feedback as well right at the end of the session, if that's okay. So just a little bit about UK General. We offer solely personal lines products. We're not in the commercial space, but we've listened with interest to the Munich team around this product. We tend to work with brokers who tend to introduce products to us. This is the first time in a long time that we've introduced a new product to the market generally, so it's a very exciting time for us. But equally, I think it's, it is very innovative. There are very, very few out there who are offering and selling personal lines cyber products. So you expect, and I expect, and I guess questions that we all hear and that we assume, that if you are an individual and if you are subject to a loss from your bank account, or if somebody hacks into your system, you would assume that if there was a physical and cash loss, that you would be covered for that. And I've got some very interesting examples later. But what we're looking at, and in particular what we're interested in offering to customers, and again feedback would be helpful, is exactly as Tim says. It's around the service and who do you go to, what do you do. So if something happens, who do you ring? If somebody's hacked into your IT system, I guess if we show of hands, I guess there'll be very few people who have some sort of service contract on their home personal equipment that you would necessarily be paying for on your business equipment. So what do you do? How do you, if somebody locks your system overnight, how would you unlock that? What would you do? And then also thinking about online purchases. So if you buy something online that doesn't arrive, again, where would you recover that money from? Would it come from your credit card company? If you've used a website that doesn't have the HTTPS, if I've said that the right way around, then I would suspect you probably would find your credit card company might not reimburse you if that item doesn't appear. So some very interesting changes in the financial services market are coming as well. And you will, and I genuinely don't know the facts and figures, and maybe these guys do, but the actual banks and building societies previously reimbursed most of those losses. Now, clearly for them, it's becoming a severe and big loss to them. So clearly they're looking at opportunities and ways of saying, as individuals, are we protecting our own data and are we protecting our own IT systems and the way in which that we're buying and selling items? So examples, I guess, first of all, we'll all obviously have photographs that we're storing online. Tim talked earlier about cyberbullying. That's something that we're looking to include under the policy that we're providing. And again, with people in the room who have younger children, it's an area where there's been a real focus in the media recently around cyberbullying and young people at school being bullied online rather than the traditional that would have happened to me, I guess, in the days when I was at school. Obviously, your cash, clearly people hacking, there may be people who hack into the bank account. And then obviously in accounts that you have, so your social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook and so on, there are ways and means, and I genuinely am not an expert in this field, and sitting with these guys every day, I'm learning something new myself. So, at the end, again, if you have any questions, then please do ask, because it's such a minefield that I think as individuals we probably don't really appreciate nor understand what the potential is here. 37% is a frightening stat. 37% of people experience cyberbullying. It's just, I couldn't believe that. I thought it'd be, maybe 7%, but certainly not 37%. And of those numbers, 60% of people were asked for explicit images, and 25% of people actually shared them. Again, we would all think that we would be sensible enough not to do something like that. But again, younger children, all of that, it just, the numbers are just staggering and frightening, I think. So from our perspective, it's around how do we protect our families and how do we protect those dear and close to us to make sure that this sort of thing is not happening. But if it does, how do you manage that situation? What do you do? Who can you turn to? And how can you help that? So two really good examples of where you perhaps would have expected to be covered by the financial or organisation who you're purchasing from, that you would expect to have cover where actually it was not the case. So the first one with Santander. So customers were, if you're a Santander customer and you make a financial transaction, so you're paying someone else an amount, you will receive a text message with a code, and you have to use that code, so a 6-digit PIN or 4-digit PIN, that you use to then transfer the monies from your bank account to another. Somehow, some fraudsters were able to intervene, send text messages, and take over that transaction so that actually that £36,000 was actually paid to fraudsters instead of paying it where it was intended to be. And Santander said in that example to those customers, they wouldn't reimburse them because that customer had given that number, that actual text number, to a fraudulent company or had used a fraudulent number. So it wasn't a number produced by Santander, so they wouldn't reimburse those customers. So again, I'm a Santander customer. I would have expected if I had a text and it didn't end up, the monies didn't end up where it expected to be, I would have thought I would have been reimbursed. They weren't. So there is some, the banks and the building societies now are saying, and credit card companies alike, if you're spending monies and you're not securing your own monies, the way that you are transacting, then you are going to be responsible as individuals. And the second example is where you purchase something online and perhaps the item doesn't arrive. Again, we are encouraged to use secure websites. But a really great example of that is for people who, a lot of us now book your holidays online, and there's a very good, some stats there coming from the BBC, that holiday booking scams totaled over £7 million last year. So that might be where you've booked your flight and your accommodation separately. You arrive at your accommodation and it doesn't exist, or it's damaged, or there's some reason why it is not as your expectation. You might have booked a 3-bedroom villa and you turn up and it's a 1-bedroom studio and you've got a family of 6 sitting there. So all those types of examples are where you have had and placed a transaction online, and who would you go to? Who would you speak to? What do you do if actually that product or service either doesn't arrive or is not what is expected? Again, through the credit card company, if you've booked online, you may have some recourse against them. But if you've booked with an unregistered, obviously these companies are not going to be ABTA registered type travel agents, travel companies, who are you going to get your money back from? There's no one to reimburse you for those losses. So I think, it's in the press every day. We're all aware and all very, very conscious of cyber attacks. Tim's given us some examples of commercial ones, and obviously those are the ones that hit the press, NHS fairly recently. Those are the ones that we're all very aware of. But there is a body now that is and has been set up by the UK government that we're working with, called Cyber Aware, yes, Cyber Essential, sorry, I forgot its name, Cyber Essential. So they've been set up by the government, and we're working closely with them to understand as individuals where we may be not covered by our bank, by our building society, by our credit card, or by a fraudster who perhaps hacks into our system. So again, some really interesting stats there. In January 14, you can see there were just 8 partners working with Cyber Streetwise, and now you're up to 265 partners who are consciously working with these government bodies, with these organisations, to try and advise and try and help people. So a significant shift in the government's view of cyber and how it impacts us as individual consumers. But how can we actually be more secure? So the first thing is, and some of these are so obvious you would genuinely think people must know this. So the first one, clearly, passwords. I read something fairly recently where there is a big percentage of people, so in excess of 10 to 15% of people who still use password as a password. That is absolutely true. I read that in a survey fairly recently. And you would think, we all think, because I'm sure people say this to you at work, you never use password as your password and you change them frequently and, you don't use your kids' names or your dog's name or whatever. But it's amazing how many of us do still do things like that. Use the same password for lots and lots of different websites. Again, so if that's leaked or if that's hacked into in some way. So it's really important, and I know a lot of the websites now, when you log on, obviously you're given a code, whether it's a strong, medium or weak password. Again, take heed of that. Really, really think about the passwords that you're using as individuals, and keep them secret. I guess one of the key challenges is it's okay to have lots and lots of different passwords, but how on earth do you remember them? Again, don't write them down, it's an obvious one. But again, there are companies setting up now to actually help you remember where you can log on onto the internet, and you can just have one password to log on and all your passwords are stored in there. What happens if that company was hacked? Somebody's got access to all of your password information. So there's lots and lots of frightening, I guess, behind the scenes that probably we're not even thinking of every day. Software updates is a very, very obvious one. Obviously, the NHS put out a message to all the different entities, make sure you update. Clearly, they didn't. So as individuals, again, I guess most people will be a bit like me. When you get home on a night, the last thing you want to do is start upgrading your software on your computer. But do that. We really encourage people to do that because that will protect your own equipment and your own safety at home. Vigilance, I've already mentioned this about the HTTPS, using websites with the HTTPS at the beginning. Quite often on the banner it will show a green line, so you know that you're in a secure website then. And again, if you're buying online, make sure that if it gives you an opportunity to put in a password for your credit card, make sure you take that opportunity. So you are doing as much as you can to secure your own safety. And finally, again, an obvious one, and because exactly as Thomas said, most people here will probably have a smartphone, there will probably be some sort of cloud backup. Again, take the opportunity to do that. Make sure that you do that, again, just to protect and to save your own data, so that if something did happen and the information was locked, you have got access to that to recover the information if you needed to do so. So the products that we're looking at, so we've been working for around about 6 months with Munich on a product, working very closely with Tim and Thomas, and taking the learnings from the commercial products and feeding those down through into what personal lines product could look like. So essentially, we've built the product with 3 key areas of cover, and importantly embedded a service within there, as we said, where you would have access to a helpline, essentially. The most important thing, that if something does happen, where do you go, where do you turn to? The elements of cover that we have included are the cyberbullying. So if there is an event of cyberbullying, there is phone through to the helpline to seek the advice and assistance of what to do, who to contact, and how to deal with that. So some advice around that. Secondly, if you buy a product or a service that either doesn't arrive or is not what you expect, so to reimburse you for that particular product or service. And then thirdly, in the event of hacking into your system and a physical loss of cash, and or the advice as to how to unlock your system if it's locked, how to then seek reimbursement from the relevant entity. If you can, and if not, obviously a benefit under the policy to reimburse you for those losses. So that's the sort of cover that we're thinking of at the moment, that we're building into the product. And as Tim has said, the key element is around the service and offering advice to people to help them. Because I think, again, in business, we would all, I suspect, typically go to our IT department. What do we do? How do we do this? But as individuals sitting at home, I expect, like me, most of you wouldn't really know what to do. So thinking about the product, and I touched on this right at the very beginning, how the product is actually sold. We do think that this is something that would need to be sold at this moment in time, and I think the expectation would be amongst most people that they would be reimbursed by either their bank, the credit card company, or by the product provider, which, as we've given some examples, clearly is not the case. So we do think this product will probably be sold. We think in the first instance it's probably a sell alongside home insurance. And there are a couple of products already out there. For example, Plum have offered a product alongside their mid-net worth offering. So that's as an add-on to their mid-net worth home insurance. And
Sorry, Martin from Plum, just to correct you there. It's not an add-on, it's embedded automatically. It's embedded automatically into mid-net worth and high net worth. Yep. We're thinking about including the non-standard products that we've got, low limits, and this is where we're deciding whether it's an add-on in a traditional sense or automatically.
I guess you're in the same place as we are, thinking about how best that this should be offered to customers, because again, you know, the key message, and I've just had this question probably an hour and a half ago, is how, you know, why do people might think that they've already covered for this? Why would someone buy this? What would they see as the benefit to this? Because clearly none of us want to sell someone a product that either they already have a benefit for somewhere else, or that we're selling them something that clearly, you know, they genuinely don't think they need. So we need to be very, very clear around the product and why it's on offer, but actually why it is essential. And also, there's an option, obviously in time, for this maybe to become standalone, is our current view and what the research has currently told us. Again, I'd be quite interested at the end to see views within the room. But we don't think somebody will wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly think, oh, I must buy cyber insurance. We genuinely think it's something as, you know, MGAs and as brokers, we will need to talk to our customers about. And without wishing to frighten people, clearly I think it's just something that obviously is becoming, the public are becoming more and more aware of. And I think it is incumbent on us to have some answers for them, you know, if they want to inquire about those levels of cover, and obviously to offer them some protection. So for us, that is the end of the session. We're happy to take any questions for any of the four of us. And yeah, first one. If you just wouldn't mind saying who your question's directed to, if you know, and if not, I will probably pass it over.
Okay. One question I would have for you. My name is Christian Wüster from Intelligent Insurer. I'm a journalist. Just something to clarify. In the Santander case you described earlier, I would have thought that Santander would have to prove that they have given away these numbers or this code or whatever, and they would actually have to pay unless they can prove that that really happened. The other question is also clarification for Tim, maybe. It's sorry, what was I want to ask now? Oh yeah, because you said the GDPR would trigger a similar growth in the personal lines regarding cyber insurance, if I understood you correctly. I didn't quite understand why that is, because I would have thought that a lot of the risk would be with the companies on the corporate side. Maybe you can clarify that as well. Thank you very much.
If you don't mind, I will hand over to Tim, because he gave me the example of Santander, so that was coming, yeah.
So in the Santander case, they did refuse to pay it because the client or the customer had received text from the fraudster in a way that made them look like they were coming from Santander. The fraudster then used the bank account details to initiate a payment, which triggered the one-time password coming to the customer, but they'd already been prepped for that. And then, oh, my previous text from Santander was, can I forward this back to them to check the system's working, or however they wanted to con them. And at that point, the bank says, well, you were told you never share this code with anybody. And the fact that the only way they could have transferred that money is for you to provide that code to them. So we're not paying, and it happened to 2 of their customers, totaling 36K earlier this year. And your other question, we see the GDPR being an uptick in the commercial and SME space. My comment about personal lines was more, it's going to become more and more in the public awareness, which is going to drive people to understand this risk more, and that would lead to pickup. And KPMG has a report from the German region that they think personal lines cyber is going to be a significant portion of cyber premium by the 2030s, which is going to be, as Karen said, as it becomes a standalone product, as you start talking about your car is connected, your fridge is connected, everything's connected. and you see other covers that are currently traditional insurance rolling into being more of a cyber cover, the premium's going to grow again.
It's more just to follow up a conversation I was having just before we came in the room, actually. It seems to me that for commercial... Sorry, David Bennion, editor of Reactions magazine. So it seems to me that a lot of the commercial lines business, in a way, it's easier. The distribution side of things seems so much more important for personal lines, in that you know, when you look at the successful examples that you might quote from other industries and stuff, it's often via a mobile app. And I think for this, one example from personal experience, as you said, try and think of this as consumers ourselves. I mean, for example, for my Amex, I get a monthly email that tells me it's an additional service, you know, it tells me it's against identity theft risk, so, you know, activity within the past month but what I guess what I'm getting at is the way through this to distribute more about finding other services that you can partner up with, whether it's an identity theft credit card service or work with McAfee on antivirus software, and tie in your insurance product with an app that does something else, or with a service provider that does something else already. And that way you reach a huge amount of customers that otherwise, in the commercial lines business, they're going to go through a broker and they're going to buy business at Lloyd's. I don't buy insurance at Lloyd's personally. How the hell would I go about doing that? A man on the street doesn't have a clue, and traditional lines of insurance are fairly sort of, I don't know, it seems like a different world. I just wonder if you think that's the way to approach this, to partner up with other people, and how you might go about doing it.
There is a possibility of doing so. I guess with my underwriting hat on now, I'm going to say aggregation of risk, because if you sold, say, through a bank, and that bank was hacked into, for example, and you're the whole of the population, or 10% of customers, and that's a rather large claim from that organisation. So I would say with my underwriting hat on, I'd be slightly fearful of that. But equally, you're right, the distribution with sufficient volume, you would say, would answer that question. We are at very early stages of this. We're looking to probably launch the product around about the 1st of September. And that's why it's just interesting for feedback from various people. But so far, the feedback we've had via broker sessions, research that we've done, research using the Cyber Essential, is that exactly as Plum have done, it's alongside home insurance seems to be the way in which the product is currently sold, alongside something else. I think to the point of it being standalone, I think that would probably work in time, would be my view. I don't know if you've any...
I think it's, at the moment, if you put it with home insurance, you're putting it in front of someone at a point where they're considering buying insurance. And I think it's a very valid point, and we've had discussions around your McAfees, or does it fit with Gadget or something else? And I think you're very right. For the younger generations, I don't have home insurance. I'm never going to pick this product up like that. You've got to find another route to market, and whether that is talking to one of these password management apps, but this brings us another aggregation problem, and thinking about can we add it as you pay your subscription to your password manager, and part of that subscription covers you if your details are lost, and the insurance will pay for any financial loss out of that. So I think there's some interesting other routes, but my view would be home is the easy win to start with. So you start there, you establish your product, your proposition, and then you go out with a complete product to talk to alternative distribution. I think
sorry, on ransomware, I'm just curious as to the politics and the legalese and that sort of thing, insofar as, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And that's, and also you mentioned Bitcoin, and whether or not there would be any kind of political movement that would be clamping down on using Bitcoin for this kind of thing, or clamping down on Bitcoin. I know there's a Chinese president who would quite like to see some restrictions in that area. So I was just wondering if the panel can comment on the politics and legal, and whether insurance policy can pay out to terrorists. I know, or to the ransom people. I know with K&R, obviously it does, but that's also part of the bigger picture. So.
Yeah, I can take the legal part. I mean, there are certainly question marks, I think, as a matter of public policy as to what an insurance policy could cover anyway. I mean, interesting, Tim Marsh and I were talking about this the other day. I mean, maybe in the commercial side, and what it might cover, he can look at. But yeah, there certainly are problems with any sort of policy that would fly in the face of what you call public policy. I mean, probably a more straightforward example of that would be when we're talking about GDPR, which is the new compliance regime, and these massive fines. Equally, you could say, well, if the fines are going to be the greater of, 20 million or 4% of global turnover, could even, I mean, we're getting into businesses now, but would that be an insurable risk? Would it be possible to pay out? Because it may even be that it can't, because that in effect is a penalty. It's a form of fine. I agree. So you're in the same sort of situation when you're talking about Bitcoin. Certainly, in my work, I'm often asked the question, do I pay a ransom? Because I'm told, if I pay the ransom, then they're going to do A, B, and C. And the advice is, obviously, it depends on the facts. But usually the advice is not to pay in any way, in any event, because you can't guarantee that it will yield any results. Again, you're just showing weakness. So I think from, if you're talking about the legal side of it, then I think there would certainly be difficulties in any money flowing in the direction of a blackmailer, for Bitcoin use, or to cover anything that was actually deemed a penalty because you basically hadn't safeguarded somebody's information from a cyber attack. I don't know whether Tim wants to
I think the simple answer is, if you go upstairs, you can buy a policy for a commercial company and they will pay for ransoms, with the caveat only where it's legally permissible. So until someone puts their foot down and says, in the UK you have a law that says you can't fund terrorism, so you have to be sure that your ransom is not going to a terrorist organisation, and that would be a very serious hard stop on paying that ransom. But until there is more clarity on the law, it's being offered in the corporate space. Whether it's clever or not to pay it is a kind of a situational question, I guess, on whether your business interruption is going to be more than the cost and the risk in paying your ransom. But in the personal line space, you don't really have that discussion. So it becomes a question of, is the stuff you can't get back so valuable to you that you need to pay it? And ultimately, even if we offer a product and we decide legally you can't pay, we can't stop the client paying. So we can give a lot of advice about what you could do instead and pay for that. But if the client decides they're just going to pay and get their photos back, we can't tell them what to do.
I guess it depends what your photos look like.
So I think that kind of was around your question. I don't know if it was a direct answer to that, but...
Hi, Michael Crawford, Head of Data Analytics at Barnum Waddingham. There's one question, and you touched on it briefly, was aggregation risk. Most of the stuff you're going to be doing is personal cyber. You're looking at quite homogeneous systems. People run Windows or Macs. You've got a network effect. These things can basically be written. You get a zero-day kind of attack. I can write something very, very quickly. How do you guard against that? Literally every, the massive cat event where everything happens at once and everyone gets hit. Catastrophe stuff has probably a very high probability of happening. How do you basically mitigate against that?
And I think WannaCry is probably a very good example of,
I'd say
it's possible to write something that spreads indiscriminately still in this day and age. But on the flip side, that wasn't particularly well done, but you could also argue there was natural breaks on it. People have to do something for it to come into the system.
I think the fact that people have to be paid in Bitcoin and the people who got hit by WannaCry and the people who can pay in Bitcoin are two mutually exclusive sets. So, but that could have been very different.
And you've still got the fact there's a load of computers that are encrypted and you're causing damage in that respect. So I would say that attack showed that actually, although it's a homogeneous group in some respects, there are still differences. And if you're, say, for example, you start off, you're only covering the financial loss, there's then another jump. Just because you've got into every system, you then have to make another jump into getting bank account details and then using bank account details and taking the money out. So there's enough steps in that chain, we believe, to stop the aggregation. Okay. Where I'd be more worried about aggregation is if we were paying to fix your computer from if you start talking about the ransomware space, then I think it's more of a worry. Yeah. And it'd be about accumulation and requiring accumulation control and budgeting and things like that. But I think WannaCry, the fact that WannaCry wasn't catastrophic is somewhat worrying that it could happen, but also comforting that it wasn't on the massive scale it could have been on.
Yeah, me again. Just another question about the data. So I understand, so the point earlier, Tim's point, that it's a good way into this market to get a customer while they're already thinking about buying insurance anyway on their home, something that most people have to have. So that makes perfect sense. But you've still got this problem where your main interaction with a customer is only when they take out insurance and then when they renew it 12 months later. And data is a huge problem in this area. So how, when you've already got your foot in this market, you've found a way in that sense, and you're keeping your limits reasonably low, sort of 50, 100k limit on any individual insured, that kind of limit. So you're not going to have a huge exposure here, I guess. But if you want to keep writing this over time, you're going to need to build up data. It seems silly, I would say, to just only have interaction when the customer takes out the policy and not be collecting data in the meantime between then and renewal. Are there any ways to improve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, without, there's lots of people in this room who will have their own marketing plans. If they feel this is genuinely a worthwhile product to sell to their customers, we're just giving an example that we would sell it alongside home insurance is our immediate research. But I'm sure as brokers, to add this on midterm during the year, then everybody would be interested in doing so. Marketing plans around contacting people at various touch points, and as a broker, most brokers would want to contact their customers during the course of the year, and this is maybe a good marketing message to do so. We don't profess to, tell people how to sell the covers. I guess we're just coming up with suggestions how and what our research has shown so far that, to my example, people are not just waking up tomorrow and thinking, oh, I'll just buy cyber insurance. I guess it's more around the educational piece, and maybe that's the way that the broker market will look at this, to educate the consumer that, that there are instances out there where you won't necessarily recover the monies or funds from somewhere else that you may have expected to do so. So I would say, yeah, definitely during the course of the year, you'd be collecting this. You could possibly add it onto the policy during the course of the year or buy a standalone. We're not prescribing that at the moment. We're just suggesting what our research has shown to us.
Hi, I'm Alison Holmes. I'm from CoPlus. This is probably more of an observation than anything else, but I think there is inertia out there around, one, people think it will never happen to them, despite everything we see in the media, and two, I think, again, people do think it's always going to be provided by their banks, and there is such a massive difference between what banks provide and the education they provide. I know Barclays have just started to run a series of TV ads on how to protect yourself online, just as an example, but there is no minimum standards on banks, I guess, other than normal data protection requirements. I think it's difficult to kind of get around that, and that is really the heart of things, making people realise that we're so connected now, we rely on everything, our whole lives are in our phones. That's kind of where we've got to grab people.
Okay, thank you. Let's bring this session to a stop. I'm sure our colleagues on the top table will remain with us. There's probably teas and coffees outside, but would you please show your appreciation to the panel? Well, from my point, there's a couple of very interesting situations. We talk about adding cyber. A lot of you will know that in June, the rate of IPT went from 10 to 12%. So if you have a policy, personal lines or commercial, that attached before June, and then you add cyber on it, Treasury will say that's a new risk, and that will be at the higher rate. So just be careful if you do add it on, and I think it's right to be careful. A little thing, Dan, that I thought was quite interesting also when you talked about the numbers of people who are perhaps being hacked. I actually attend the all-party parliamentary group, and there was a guy sitting on the panel who said absolutely nothing and said, oh, I work for GCHQ. There are two types of businesses out there, those that have been hacked and those that don't know it yet, which is quite a worrying factor from GCHQ. I actually feel like saying it was probably by you, but you couldn't really say that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that. Thank you for our fantastic panel. It's very, very good. Karen's holding up a Christmas pudding there. Oh, look, they've got a bottle of drink there. I wonder why that is. Maybe somebody would like to draw that. Why not ask the young lady down here in the front if you'd like to draw a card out? That's all right. Don't worry. You won't win. And Karen will announce the winner. And if it's under 50 quid, you don't have to put it into gifts and hospitality register.
William Kersley from K International.
Well done, William. Thank you very much indeed. I just also wanted to say that we at the MGAA are actually preparing what we termed as top 10 tips. And this will be to stop us ourselves being hacked. I think, again, Dan, you'll be able to help me on this one. I saw something from Business Innovation Skills a while ago that said about 70% of hacking is all done by ex-employees, which again is a pretty worrying figure. So that's it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of it. The last thing that Jane's shouting at me at, we have our own conference on the 4th of July here in London. If you haven't registered already, please go online, register. We've got some cracking panel debates, and we're also very grateful that we've got Stephen Catlin as our guest speaker and keynote speaker as well. So please come along. It doesn't cost anything. All members are able to come. Gentlemen, you'll be most welcome as our guest to come as well. And obviously, Karen is actually on one of our panels as well. So please stay behind, share with us. I'm sure our colleagues are here, and they've probably got some other colleagues in the room. And you can come and join us. And thank you for your attendance.
Thank you very much.